Hello, and welcome to my new podcast called When I'm High. This intro episode is just to give you a bit of the backstory of how this podcast came to be, and also what I hope the future is for the podcast, or more specifically, this project as a whole. When I was young, all the adults said drugs are bad. There was the DARE program, where cops came into your school to tell you about why you should say no to drugs. I took this all to heart and believed everything they said. As time went on, I knew people who were starting to smoke pot, and none of the negative things that they told us would happen were happening. I still couldn't bring myself to try it for some reason, but it was becoming clear that the things people in positions of power had said about drugs, or at least in this case marijuana, were not really true. I slowly began to get curious about what it felt like to be high. It wasn't something people talked about, and you couldn't really get a straight answer from the people because it's so hard to describe. As the years went on, I got more and more curious about the effects of cannabis, and I was getting into the film and animation world. I thought that this could be a really interesting topic for a documentary. I had always liked the idea of interviewing multiple people on one topic to see how their perspectives were similar or different, and also to learn more about that topic and the people themselves. Over time, I wrote up a massive list of questions all related to cannabis and mostly what it's like to be high. From preferred methods of intake, to what do you like to do when you're high, to how has cannabis affected your life, and everything in between. And then, at the end of 2014, I was finally ready, so I began to interview people. Over the next few years, I accumulated over 30 interviews, mostly people who use cannabis on a regular basis, some who only used it in their past, and some who had never tried it before. But when I started this back in 2014, only a few states had legalized cannabis, and most of the people I was interviewing wanted to be anonymous. I had to figure out how I was going to deal with that. I didn't want to do the boring thing where you blur their face or make them a silhouette. So, Rotoscope Animation came in to save the day. Here's the short explanation of what Rotoscope Animation is. It's where you film live-action footage and then use that footage as a reference to make your animation. You basically draw right on top of the footage and usually do something interesting with the art, either change the shape or the color, or really just anything you want because you can do anything in animation. My plan was that after everything was edited, each subject would be rotoscoped to look different than they actually look in real life, so they could be anonymous. There are many examples of rotoscope animation over the last century, but if you're curious what it looks like, one of the most famous examples is the music video for the song Take On Me by a-ha. And recently, there were two TV shows that are pushing the limits of digital rotoscope animation, and they are Undone, which is on Amazon Prime, and Corp LLC, which is on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim. But there was a film that had the rotoscope animation style that I thought made the most sense for my film, and that was a Richard Linklater film called Waking Life. Wikipedia describes the film as an experimental, philosophical, adult animated docufiction film that explores a wide range of philosophical issues, including the nature of reality, dreams, consciousness, the meaning of life, free will, and existentialism. The film would be interesting enough if it was entirely live action, but the animation brings it to another level. There's a scene where two men in the middle of their conversation become cloud versions of themselves. In another scene, the words that a woman is saying come out of her mouth and visually show us what she's talking about. This is what I needed for my documentary. The ability to take what the person is saying about what it feels like to be high and show it visually, either by changing their appearance, changing the background, or bringing things to life in front of and around the person. The possibilities were literally endless. And on top of all that, the people could still be anonymous. I edited each of the main topics into short sequences, ranging from about 5 to 15 minutes each. But how do I get it all animated? It's a very slow process, especially by just one person. So the only way I was going to be able to get this done was if I hired people, and that is not cheap. So for the last few years, it's just been sitting there, unanimated and unseen by anybody except me and a couple other people. Until recently, when I got the idea to turn it into a podcast. Because everyone has a podcast these days, and if you don't have one, don't worry, I'm sure the Department of Content Creation will force you to have one soon. I've taken those sequences, cut them down a little bit so they fit better in the audio-only format, and this is what I'll be releasing weekly over the next 4 months or so. And I thought now would be a perfect time to release it since we are currently in a month-long 420, April 2020. If you don't know, 420 is an important number in the cannabis culture, but I'm not going to get into that here. I currently have 16 episodes to share with you, but what's going to happen after that? Well, for the podcast itself, maybe I'll end up doing some audio-only interviews with new people exclusively for the podcast. Everybody has a story to tell, which I personally love hearing, and I hope you will too. And I'm not abandoning the idea of turning this into some sort of visual medium. I think this information is great to hear, but I think it will be much more impactful and interesting when you add the visuals to it. Unfortunately, we live in a worldwide culture where money rules all, so I'm not going to be able to get it animated without money. One of my main goals of this podcast is to just get more exposure for this project so I can hopefully raise enough money to hire animators so we can all experience this visually, the way it was meant to be seen. It might be a documentary, it might be a series of shorts, but no matter what, it'll need to be seen, and I plan on making it as visually amazing as I can. So thank you for checking out this intro episode, and I hope you tune in to the rest of this podcast, and maybe someday we can see it in all its glory.